Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack complex sources to get you well-informed fast. And today we are jumping into a really remarkable historical document. It's the Apostle Paul's first letter to the church in the ancient city of Corinth.
And it's essentially a letter written to put out a five-alarm spiritual fire.
Right. Our sources really frame it that way, as Paul diagnosing this total chaos in a city wrestling with power, philosophy, and, well, runaway spiritual gifts.
This is such a critical deep dive because, Paul's decision to plant a church in Corinth was so strategic.
It wasn't just some random city.
Not at all. Think of it like the New York and Las Vegas of the ancient world all rolled into one. It was a massive commercial hub right up there with Rome or Alexandria. He actually stayed there for 18 months, just pouring his life into this community.
But the sources are really clear that all that commercial success came with a pretty massive spiritual cost.
Absolutely. The city was just saturated in idolatry and this aggressive sensuality. You had these magnificent temples, including the infamous cult of Aphrodite.
So when the church started, it was pulling people directly out of that very pagan, very libertine environment.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to figure out how Paul, as this sort of spiritual architect, dealt with a community that had brand new faith but was still, acting like the city around it.
All the divisions, the pride, the chaos.
We're going to trace how he offered solutions that weren't about better religious techniques, but about this unified, selfless focus on Christ crucified and ultimately the pursuit of love.
So let's start right where Paul starts, which is this incredible paradox of the Corinthian Christians.
Okay.
He begins the letter by acknowledging their spiritual wealth. He says it were, quote, enriched in all utterance and all knowledge.
So they were smart and they were articulate.
And charismatic. He says they lacked no spiritual gift. By all accounts, they seem like they had it all.
That sounds like the ideal church community.
Mm.
But then almost immediately, Paul just pulls the rug out from under them. He calls them infantile and carnal. How can a community that has every spiritual gift be so immature? It just doesn't compute.
It's the ultimate critique of spiritual pride, isn't it? They had all the charisma, all the flash, the display of gifts, but zero character.
Wow.
And the sources show Paul identified really specific problems that all stemmed from that immaturity. They confused the outward signs of God's blessing with actual inner spiritual maturity.
So what did that look like day to day? What were these, character deficits?
Oh, they were everywhere. The first one was just rampant division and contention.
It's personality cults.
Exactly. I belong to Paul, I belong to Apollos. And it was like rooting for rival sports teams, but inside the church.
And it gets worse, right? They were taking each other to court.
To secular, non-believing Roman courts. They were airing all their dirty laundry financial squabbles, personal grievances in front of the very people they were trying to reach.
That just completely tanks their credibility with anyone on the outside.
Completely. But it gets even darker when you look at their social practices. You had blatant carnal practices, like sexual immorality that Paul has to address head on, plus all this confusion about marriage.
And the social injustice at the communal meals, the love feast,
Yeah.
that part is really shocking to me.
It was a horrific display of status. The agape feast was supposed to be this unifying meal, but in Corinth, you had these deep social divides.
So the rich and the poor.
Right, the wealthier members who didn't have to work all day would show up early, they'd eat their fill, even get drunk on their wine, before the poor member slaves, laborers could even get there.
So by the time the poor people show up after a long day's work, the food is gone and the rich are inebriated.
It completely inverted the whole point of the meal. It turned a celebration of unity into a showcase of class division. Paul's diagnosis was ruthless. You have knowledge, you have gifts, but you are lacking in character, humility, and most of all, love.
It really seems like that lack of character was feeding off the whole intellectual atmosphere of Corinth. The city loved its famous philosophers and orators.
Oh, absolutely. That personality cult mentality just seeped right into the church. They started valuing the flashiness of the messenger more than the actual message.
And this is where Paul delivers his radical correction.
He has to. He knows he has to dismantle the pedestal they've put their leaders on. So he asks them rhetorically, what is Paul? What is Apollos?
And the sources note that he uses the neutral gender in the Greek here. Right?
Yeah.
It's not, who are we? It's more like...
It's more like, what thing are we? Precisely. He immediately gives the answer. We're just servants, diakonoi. We just have a function.
So if the leaders are just servants, just functionaries, where does the focus go?
It goes entirely to the source of the power and wisdom. Paul says he resolved to know nothing, save Jesus Christ and him crucified. He strips away all the fancy rhetoric, all the human eloquence, because the core message itself,
The cross.
yeah, the cross, it was completely countercultural.
For the Greeks, who loved wisdom, and the Jews, who wanted signs, worshiping a crucified criminal would have been just absurd, weak.
It was a scandal to the Jews, who expected a conquering king, and it was total foolishness to the Greek intellectuals. But Paul says this foolishness is actually God's ultimate wisdom. He says God deliberately chose the foolish, the weak, the despised things of the world.
Why? Why that deliberate choice of the weak things?
To dismantle human pride, it's that simple. If God had chosen the smartest, richest, most powerful people, they could have boasted in their own resources. The whole plan was designed to humble human boasting so that all the glory, every bit of it, goes to God.
So that's the philosophical correction. But Paul still needs to give them a tangible identity to stop the chaos, and he uses these powerful metaphors to do it.
Yes, he gives them 3 core analogies to help them understand what the church is supposed to be. First, he talks about the church as a family, and in a family, the goal is maturity, not staying an infant forever.
Which is exactly what he called them, infants.
Because they lacked an appetite for solid food, for depth in the word. He's saying your immaturity is the root cause of all your factions and divisions. Maturity isn't just knowing stuff, it's putting it into practice.
So arguing over leaders is like kids fighting over toys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then he pivots. The church is God's field. This ties right back to the leaders. The ministers are just temporary farmhands. One plants the seed, another one waters it.
So there's a diversity of roles.
A diversity of roles, but the critical lesson is that the growth, the spiritual miracle, that's all God. No planter or waterer gets the credit for the harvest.
Which just neutralizes the whole personality cult thing. The leader is a temp, but the field is permanent.
Right. And then third, the church is God's temple or God's building. And this metaphor shifts the focus to quality.
Okay.
There is only one foundation, Jesus Christ, period. The ministers, they're the builders. And they have to be so careful what materials they use to build on that foundation. It has to be the word of God, sound doctrine.
Not flimsy, human wisdom.
Not human wisdom, because he says, the work of every builder will be tested by fire on the day of judgment. The fire won't destroy the builder, they're saved, but it will burn up all the shallow, showy, human-centric stuff they built.
That is a very, very high standard. Okay, let's shift to the ethical deep dive here. Christian liberty. This was a huge practical issue in Corinth, with all the market selling meat that had been sacrificed to idols.
This is where Paul gets into the tension between knowledge, gnosis, and love, agape. You had some believers, who Paul calls the strong, who had the correct theology. They knew an idol is just a piece of wood or stone.
Right, an idol is nothing. There's only one God. So eating the meat is morally neutral.
They felt they had the theological right to eat it. They were exercising their Christian freedom.
But this is where Paul drops that famous line.
Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Having the right facts isn't enough. If your correct knowledge makes you arrogant or look down on someone less informed, it's actually destructive. Your freedom becomes a weapon.
So how does love govern knowledge here? What's the actual test?
The test is the conscience of the weak brother or sister, an act that's neutral in itself, like eating meat. It becomes sinful if it causes a weaker believer, maybe a new convert who is still struggling with their pagan past, to stumble or violate their own conscience.
So my personal liberty, if I use it without love, could literally destroy someone else's faith.
That's the weight of it. And Paul establishes the golden rule of freedom. The governing principle is always love. He uses himself as the prime example. He says, if eating meat causes my brother to stumble, I will give up my right and never eat meat again.
That's a powerful statement of self-limitation. You sacrifice a personal right for the health of the community.
Exactly. The ultimate standard for everything, eating, drinking, whatever you do, is that you must do it all for the glory of God. And causing a brother or sister to stumble is, well, it's just not compatible with glorifying God.
So moving from the congregation to the leaders, Paul himself faced criticism because he often worked making tents instead of demanding financial support like the other, slick Greek orators.
And he has to define what true ministry looks like. He uses 2 really profound images. First, the minister is a Huperides.
What does that mean?
In the ancient world, it described a galley slave, literally a person condemned to die, forced to row the ship, obeying the captain, who is Jesus Christ, until the very end. You are not the captain. You are the desperate, obedient rower.
Wow. That is a startling image of servitude.
It ensures total dependence. Second, the minister is an oikonomos, a faithful steward. Your job is to administer the mysteries of God, which is the gospel. And the number one requirement for a steward isn't success or popularity.
It's fidelity.
It is absolute fidelity to the one who entrusted you with the message.
And since fidelity was the key, he had to address the whole money issue. He had to defend his right to be paid, even though he chose not to take it.
He does. He builds this incredible case for ministerial support using 5 arguments: his apostleship, common sense experience, Old Testament law, Old Testament practice, and even Christ's own teaching. It was his legitimate biblical right.
So why didn't he use it?
This is where it all comes back to selfless love. He voluntarily waived that right. He worked with his own hands for 2 reasons: love for the gospel and love for sinners. He didn't want his demand for payment to become an obstacle to anyone hearing the message.
His personal comfort was less important than the gospel's advance.
Far less important. Success for Paul was fidelity in removing obstacles, not the size of his bank account.
Okay, so finally, let's get to the ultimate hope that props all of this up.
Yeah.
The resurrection. Why was this even a debate in a Christian church?
It really came down to the influence of Greek philosophy. Platonism was huge in Corinth. The Greeks believed the soul was immortal, sure, but they saw the physical body as a prison. So the idea of the physical body coming back to life was, frankly, repulsive to them.
So they bought into Christ's spiritual message, but rejected the physical resurrection of believers. How does Paul tackle that?
He uses this airtight, irresistible logic. He creates this chain reaction of what happens if the resurrection is false.
A domino effect.
A total domino effect. He says, okay, if the dead don't rise, then Christ didn't rise. If Christ didn't rise, then we apostles are liars. If we're liars, your faith is useless, your hope is a fantasy, and this is the kill shot. You are all still lost to your sins.
That is devastating.
Mm.
It means the denial of a future event, our resurrection, completely invalidates the central historical event of Christianity, which is Christ's resurrection.
He forces them to see that the resurrection isn't some optional theological belief. It is the absolute center. Christ's resurrection is the guarantee of our future resurrection.
So what are the implications of that? If you really believe in it, how does that change your life right now?
It changes everything. It motivates evangelism because the eternal stakes are real. It gives you perspective for suffering, knowing that this temporary trouble is nothing compared to the eternal glory to come. And it demands that you separate from sin because you're preparing for a glorified, incorruptible body. It reframes death itself from a final defeat into a conquered enemy.
What an incredible journey through such a complex letter. The Corinthian church is this timeless cautionary tale. You see how spiritual gifts, knowledge, even Christian liberty can become tools for pride and division when that foundation, the cross and selfless love, is missing.
And that's exactly why Paul puts the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, right in the middle of his whole discussion on spiritual gifts and church order. He defines love as the highest virtue because it's eternal. Knowledge, prophecies, gifts, all that stuff the Corinthians prized, it's all temporary, will all pass away. But love is the lasting substance. It was the character they were missing.
So we've learned that the Corinthian church had all the spiritual gifts. They were overflowing with knowledge, and yet Paul called them the most immature and carnal church he dealt with. So that leaves a provocative thought for you to consider. What part of your life, or maybe your community today, where skill or charisma or knowledge is abundant and celebrated? What part might be secretly lacking that essential component that Paul valued above all others?